to this now. So what if Jesus was black? What if all the people spoken of in the Bible were black? This is a question that a Swedish artist has brought to life. Johan Falkman used people in KwaZulu-Natal to model for his paintings. To speak more about his vision of the Zulu Bible, he joins us live now via Skype. Johan, a very good morning to you, and thank you so much for joining us. So the places that curiosity will take you to, let's talk about what brought this to life.
Well, actually, I was brought to South Africa by Don Olofsson, who's a very good friend of mine. And he has a fantastic place in KwaZulu-Natal called Tanda. And I was invited to create art along with 29 other artists from around the world. And once we arrived to South Africa, we fell in love with this magical, biblical landscape that constitutes KwaZulu-Natal. And I was so inspired. And I felt that this is the origin of man, that the creation, the original creation took place here. It was just an intuitive feeling that I had. And so it wasn't far-fetched to start working with the biblical themes in South Africa.
And what do you focus on?
What do I focus on? Well, this is inspired by a beautiful illustrated Bible by the French artist Gustave Doré, who was active in the 19th century. And so I could easily find beautiful biblical tales. For example, the creation of Adam and Eve, and also the adoration of the Magi. And being in this magical landscape, and together with this wonderful people who live in KwaZulu-Natal, we could create these magical scenes. There is something natural about the inhabitants in South Africa, especially in the countryside. And they were brilliant actors. They gave life to these wonderful biblical stories. And so it felt like it was meant to be.
Johan, what sort of research perhaps went into this? Did you get to speak to some of the people in KwaZulu-Natal that helped you put together these paintings?
Yes, I did. I asked them, for example, what in history interests them. And a lot of them, they say that they admire the old kings, the old Zulu kings. And a lot of the stories in the Zulu history is reminiscent of what actually happened, or reminds me of what happened in the Bible. For example, I'm depicting King Saul and the difficulties that he went through using the models from KwaZulu-Natal. And I had a feeling that the models, they liked this and they could relate to the stories. My feeling was that they do love this, and we're only halfway through. We have about another 20 paintings to do, so I'm going back to South Africa soon to continue with these images.
I'm curious as to what the reaction has been. South Africa is a very race-conscious country, so when you start to ask the question, was Jesus black, it raises a lot of eyebrows. What has been the reaction to the work that you have been creating?
Well, you know, the traditional idea of Jesus is this Northern European white man, which Jesus obviously wasn't. So I think that Jesus is a symbol, and Jesus can be any race, any ethnicity that you want him to be. For example, when I'm in South Africa, it's very, very natural to use the models, the South African models, to depict these scenes, and I feel that Jesus can be black, he can be Asian, he can be white. It all depends on who is relating to him.
It all depends on who is relating to them. So your plan is to come back to South Africa, come back to KwaZulu-Natal. In terms of the people that you have used or spoken to bring together these pieces, what has been their reaction?
Well, you know, people are very, very curious about these stories because most people, myself included, when I was first starting to investigate these stories, people are not familiar with these old biblical tales. We know some of them, but for example, when we were working with these fantastic stories of Rispa, you know, I had Princess Nandi, for example, acting the role of Rispa. Rispa was this fabulous kind of early feminist woman who went against the king Her sons, she had 7 sons that were executed. Their bodies were hung to rot for 5 months to humiliate the family. Rizpah went up on the mountain, guarded the bodies for 5 months till there was nothing left, till the family received a respectful burial. And the Bible is full of these heroic women, these fantastic creatures. And I can notice how, for example, the South African villagers in KwaZulu-Natal loved playing these heroic characters. There is something inherent in us that we get inspired and infused when we're enacting these characters and playing them.
Johan, I do have a bone to pick with you, though.
Yes.
Why is this premiering in Sweden and not in KwaZulu-Natal before going out to the rest of the world?
Well, actually, it will show in South Africa, but we're starting, believe it or not, in Mexico. So the first exhibition will be at a Mexican museum, and then it will tour in Latin America, and then it will come to South Africa after that, and then it will go back to Europe. So we're doing...
Please finish your thought.
Yeah. Yes, so we're doing like a world tour of these of this South African Bible, combined with a Swedish version and a Mexican version. So I'm calling it Biblical Portraits from 3 continents: Africa, Europe, and America.
There's an image that we are running on the screen as we're having this conversation, and it's men who have their heads severed, but they're holding their head above their bodies. Talk to us about that image. What were you portraying there?
Well, this story is about King Saul. King Saul and his sons, they were executed. Their heads were severed, and the bodies were hung to be humiliated on the walls of the village of Jabez. And at night, the villagers came to the wall to take the bodies down, and all the villagers were helping to take the heads and the bodies and collecting them and giving them a respectful burial. And I was painting this with villagers from KwaZulu-Natal. And what I did not know at the time was that the mothers who are actually holding the heads are the mothers of the models behind them, whose decapitated bodies are. What I had to do was I had to paint their bodies separately from their heads. So as you can see, the bodies are all decapitated, and the mothers are actually holding their heads. And so I was pretending that the women, the Zulu mamas from KwaZulu-Natal, are the villagers of Jabez, taking down the decapitated bodies of their sons.
Sure. Johan, in closing up the conversation, what is Christianity, spirituality, religion, whatever you want to call it, what does it mean to you in putting together this Black Bible?
For me, it's a symbol of us, of you, of me, of us as human beings. All these stories are about us. You may interpret them or look at them as a religious person or a non-religious person. Just seeing them as symbols. You don't have to be a Christian to be able to relate to these very deeply symbolic stories. I find it so fascinating to see how people in South Africa, in Europe, me myself can relate to these stories, my models can relate to these stories, and how very, very difficult it is to work with these extremely symbolic and deep tales from the Bible. So for me, it's not necessarily a Christian project. It's more so a very deep symbolic project that brings man to life. And in this case, it's the spirit of South Africa that I feel comes through in these paintings.
Johan Falkman, a great pleasure chatting to you. Thank you very much for making time for us.